The Council of Ascendant Worlds had convened for the 47th time in a century, and as always, humanity's seat sat empty. Not vacant, empty. There was a difference, Celine had learned. A vacant seat implied absence. An empty seat implied choice. She studied the holographic star map rotating above the council table, a glittering wheel of 700 civilizations, every sun catalogued, every inhabited world numbered, every military asset logged with obsessive precision. The Galactic Intelligence Bureau prided itself on knowing everything. That was, after all, the entire point of her existence. She was Celine, Chief Intelligence Officer of the Galactic Confluence, a Valorian whose silver-threaded mind had mapped the political architectures of 400 species. She had predicted the Keth Rebellion 3 decades before it ignited. She had warned the Council about the Draken Plague 16 months before Patient Zero collapsed. Her record was, by any reasonable measure, immaculate. Which was why what she was looking at right now made her feel profoundly, existentially ill. "The numbers don't match," she said quietly. Ambassador Jorith of the Cephalid Union turned his many-lidded eyes toward her. "I beg your pardon?" Celine pulled up the file she had been quietly building for the past 9 months. It appeared above the council table like a ghost of data, of cross-referenced production manifests, stellar cartography surveys, and deep space energy signatures that should not have existed. Humanity's declared military fleet, she began, consists of 42 cruisers, 11 carriers, and approximately 300 escort-class vessels. This is what they submitted to the Confluence Registry 14 years ago. This is what every subsequent audit has confirmed. She paused. This is a lie. The chamber went very still. "That is an extraordinary claim," said High Arbiter Mayan, her crystalline voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who did not yet know which direction to panic in. "What evidence?" "Helium-3 extraction." Celine expanded her display. Earth's lunar operations have been extracting helium-3 at a rate 40 times what their declared fleet requires for fuel. For 18 years. I initially dismissed this as industrial surplus, perhaps energy exports, perhaps civilian infrastructure. But there are no corresponding export receipts. The helium-3 simply disappears. Another display opened. Gravitational wave readings from the outer rim of the Milky Way's spiral arms, taken by automated survey drones whose logs no one had thought to check because no one built anything out there. These gravitational signatures, Celine continued, are consistent with large-scale propulsion testing. Specifically, with drives significantly more powerful than anything in the Confluence's current technological register. She let that sit for a moment. They have been recurring, at irregular intervals, for 11 years. Ambassador Jorith was the first to find his voice. "You are saying humanity has been secretly building warships." "I am saying humanity has been secretly building something," Celine corrected carefully. "And that something requires enough fuel to power a fleet 10 times larger than the one they declared. And that something is apparently being tested, or operated, in a region of space that no Confluence survey drone has ever been tasked to examine in detail, because we never thought anyone would be there." "Where, precisely, is there?" High Arbiter Mayan asked. Celine zoomed the galactic map out. And out. And out further still, until the glittering wheel of the Milky Way shrank to a bright smear in the center of the display, surrounded by the vast and lightless nothing of intergalactic space. She placed a marker 60,000 light-years beyond the outer rim. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than before. Before, it had been the silence of people who were surprised. Now it was the silence of people who were trying to understand the shape of something too large to see all at once. Fleet Admiral Ethan received the Council's emergency summons while he was eating breakfast. He read it, set down his coffee, and called his aide. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour." His aide hesitated. "Sir, the summons says immediately." "I know what it says." He picked his coffee back up. "Tell them an hour." He was not a tall man, Ethan. He had the kind of face that forgot to be remarkable average height, gray at the temples, the sort of person who could stand in a crowded room and be comfortably overlooked. This was, he had always thought, the single most useful thing about him. He arrived at the Confluence Council chamber precisely 63 minutes after the summons. He walked in alone. He sat down in humanity's empty seat, really sat in it, for the first time in his memory, and he folded his hands on the table and he looked at Celine across the display of stars that separated them. "You found it," he said. It was not a question. Celine studied him for a long moment. "The gravitational signatures," she said. "The fuel extraction discrepancy. The fact that your deep space survey program has been, for 15 years, mapping regions that no other species had reason to map. We're very thorough." "Admiral." High Arbiter Mayan leaned forward. "You will explain yourself. Now. Without the pleasantries." Ethan nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket. The council chamber's security systems tracked the motion with 12 different targeting solutions, all of which he was aware of, and produced a data chip, which he set on the table. 2,240 vessels, he said. That's the current number. Ranging from light pickets to dreadnoughts. Construction began approximately 20 years ago, following the Garen incident. The Garen incident. Celine felt the words land in her chest like stones dropped into deep water. 22 years ago, a Garen fleet, unauthorized, acting on the orders of a rogue admiral, had reached Earth's system. They had been repelled. Barely. The Confluence had issued formal apologies. Sanctions had been levied. It had been, officially, resolved. The Council's response to the Garen incident, Ethan continued quietly, was diplomatic. Appropriate, by your standards. By ours. He paused. We looked at how close they got. We looked at what would have happened if they'd been 20% faster, or if our defense grid had been 20% slower. And we made a decision. To deceive the Confluence, Ambassador Jorith said coldly. To survive, Ethan replied, with a gentleness that was somehow worse than anger. We have been members of this Confluence for 140 years. In that time, we have been the target of 7 unprovoked incursions, 3 blockades, and 1 near-extinction event that this council spent 4 years debating whether to formally acknowledge. He did not raise his voice. We like this Confluence. We believe in what it is trying to be. We would like it to continue existing, and we would like to continue existing within it. He looked around the table. But we decided, after the Garen incident, that we would never again depend entirely on the goodwill of others for our survival. Celine had spent her career reading intelligence assessments. She had read the language of threat and counter-threat in 100 species communications. She recognized, with a clarity that left her strangely calm, that Ethan was not threatening anyone right now. He was simply describing a fact, the way one might describe the weather, or the way light travels. The fleet is beyond Confluence space, she said. Beyond scanning range of any member world. Yes. And if the Confluence demanded it be dismantled? Ethan was quiet for a moment. That would be a demand we would have to think very carefully about, he said. And I believe you would have to think very carefully about how to enforce it. High Arbiter Mayan's crystalline composure cracked, almost imperceptibly. Almost. You cannot operate a military asset of that scale indefinitely in secret. We weren't planning to operate it in secret indefinitely, Ethan said. We were planning to operate it in secret until we were certain it would never be necessary. We are not certain yet. He picked up the data chip and held it for a moment, then set it back down. But we told you today. That counts for something. Celine looked at the marker on the star map, 60,000 light-years beyond the rim, in the cold dark between galaxies where no civilization had thought to look, and she thought about how long humanity had been sitting in their empty seat, smiling politely, voting on resolutions, attending diplomatic functions, all while building something enormous and patient and quiet in the dark. She thought about what it meant that she had found it only because she had been looking, and that for 18 years, no one had thought to look. Yes, she said, almost to herself. It counts for something. Ethan looked at her across the star map, and for just a moment, the corner of his unremarkable mouth curved upward. We hoped you'd see it that way. The emergency session of the Galactic Confluence Council lasted 11 hours. No formal record of its conclusion was entered into the public register. Humanity's seat, for the first time in living memory, was not empty when the session ended. It was occupied.